If you've clicked on this video, it's likely that you want to make $1 million. And if you focus for just the next 30 minutes, I will give you a simple 5-step blueprint to make $1 million from scratch with no experience and no investment. Or of course, you could click away. You could keep looking for quick wins and you will stay exactly where you are. So it's really up to you. My name is Chris Donnelly and I built and sold my first company for $25 million at 29 years old. I then built a 9-figure health tech business with my brother over the last 5 years. So I can share the exact systems that I used to achieve freedom with my time, with my location, and with my finances. So if you're stuck in a 9-to-5, or you're building a business that isn't really going anywhere, or you've even tried a business that has failed, you may be worried that you haven't got what it takes. And I've experienced the same exact thoughts. In my first business, I spent the first 5 years working 60 to 80-hour weeks, all barely turning a profit. I felt trapped in my own company and I thought there was honestly no way out. And it wasn't until I stepped back from the daily work and the daily task that I realized that I had made a really classic mistake. I was in a market that was insanely competitive and I had to work more hours than anyone else to gain any type of real advantage. It was like choosing to swim against the tide. So no matter how hard I swam, I got tired and eventually the tide would take me backwards. At 6 years in, I realized that there was a much better way. One that would let me swim with the tide and make revenue far easier without losing my entire life. So step 1 in this blueprint, it's incredibly important, is finding what I call rising tide markets. So like me 10 years ago, most people build good ideas in quite stagnant markets. If you're having to sell really hard, it's likely that you're already losing. Therefore, you have to work out where the rising tide is. The first example, which is a really famous one, is when Jeff Bezos was working full-time on Wall Street in 1994, and he came across a household report that stated that web usage was growing at 2,300% every single year. He quit his multi-million-dollar job and launched Amazon, of course going on to become one of the wealthiest people ever. He rode the wave of internet adoption. But in history, there are dozens of these moments. Of course, massive technological jumps, and then also smaller cultural or consumer changes that you can ride. So in 2000, half the world had never made a phone call. But by 2010, over 4 billion people, nearly 60% of the world's population, had a mobile phone. Then you have the launch of the App Store, where in 1 year, there was 85,000 apps live and 3 billion app downloads for something that didn't exist the year before. And something I want all of you to think about is the explosion of generative AI. With over 100 million users in the first 2 months, this is the fastest consumer adoption in technology history. And therefore, once you have found a rising tide market, you want to align yourself with that market. Whether you're a service provider within the market, helping people adopt the new technology, or whether you yourself try and build something new based upon that technological advancement. So let me show you now the 4-step process that you can use to find rising tide markets for free. So step 1 is you actually want to go to ChatGPT and ask it to give you the most recent consumer trend reports from the big 4 consulting firms. These firms produce these reports for free because they are trying to win business with other massive companies. Now, Google the titles that ChatGPT gives you and download the actual PDF reports. Upload those reports into a custom GPT and ask for the most significant consumer trend changes over the last 24 months. Once you've identified consumer changes, I want you then to create a very detailed prompt asking the deep research function of ChatGPT to prepare you a deep research report on that consumer change and how it is likely to continue to change over time. Step 2 is I want you to look for a specific change in consumer behavior or technology change. And then I want you to create a detailed prompt asking the deep research feature of ChatGPT to create your report on the likely development of that consumer change or technology and what implications that might have based upon previous changes in consumer sentiment or technology. For example, I was randomly looking earlier and I found one. Gen Z are drinking 20% less alcohol than previous generations. It's an interesting fact. Is it a big enough market for me these days? Probably not. But maybe there is an opportunity for someone in there. Step 3 is you want to look for consumer insight and consumer pain right now. So you want to type that trend into Reddit or into niche communities. And if there are genuine problems, people will be talking about it. And that means that there might be a genuine opportunity around that pain point. Step 4 is cross-checking content demand. So if you can find creators on YouTube, on TikTok, on blogs, etc., who are blowing up on this topic, it's likely that you found something that a lot of people are seriously into and are really focused on. So my rule of thumb here is if there's growth, spending, and pain, you have found a rising tide. So as you're doing this, I want you to think about 3 key things. So the first thing I want you to think about is whether there are industries that are already taking advantage of this technology or consumer change that you have found. So for example, when my brother and I started our health tech company, Lottie.org, which is for elderly care, which is effectively booking.com for care homes, we noticed the aging population was consistent across multiple countries and that the elderly care space was incredibly traditional and didn't use much technology at all. We then saw a lot of articles and content online covering the lack of transparency within the market and how people struggled to know if their relative was getting the care that they were promised and whether the price was fair. The second point to look at is to look at the current competition to help validate your demand. So with our business, we saw there was a similar phone-based service that was working in America and was a multi-billion-dollar business. This then helped us to validate the demand and secured our first round of investment. I always think early founders get this wrong when they say that no one is doing this at all. And if no one is doing it at all, it means that in many ways that demand probably hasn't existed properly, because otherwise people would have wrapped traditional solutions around it. You had estate agencies before you had Rightmove, and you had travel agencies before you had booking.com and so forth. So if the demand existed, it would have been met by a previous technological solution. And the third thing to focus on is the size of the market. So it's important to choose markets where even a small slice of the pie can generate you serious profit. So you want to think about TAM here, which is target addressable market. You can calculate this by multiplying the number of customers by the average revenue per customer. So in our startup Lottie, we looked at how many care homes there were in the UK and the US, which is our addressable market, and how much those care homes paid for software presently. There were about 60,000 care homes averaging $2,000 to $4,000 a month on software. Therefore, we'll call that on average $3,000 a month or $36,000 a year. So we have to times 60,000 care homes by $36,000 a year, and that created a $2 billion market opportunity. So Lottie went on after 4 years to be worth over $100 million and is now a big, fast growth company based in the UK. So we're a few minutes into this video, and now you're ahead of 85% of people in the way they think about starting businesses, because you now know how to find rising tide markets and align yourself with them. And that way you can position yourself best to make $1 million without working yourself into the ground. If you found this valuable so far, then please hit the subscribe button below. The team and I have a very ambitious goal of hitting 1 million subs by the end of the year, so we would really appreciate your support. So now you're in a brilliant starting position. But it's important to be careful, because even if you have the right market and the right rising tide, if you have the wrong business model, it's likely that you will become trapped in your own business, similar to how I was 10 years ago. So step 2 is picking a high leverage business model. So making this decision early and being intentional about it will not only bring you more from a financial perspective, but it will allow you to live a life with far greater freedom with your time and your location, which in turn will give you much better headspace to make better decisions in general. So when I made the decision to try and get my time back after working, honestly, 80-hour weeks for 10 years, I initially moved to one-on-one coaching, which at the time I thought was a great alternative, as I could do it from wherever I wanted in the world, and I could charge an incredibly high fee per hour. But after doing this for a few months, I realized I was effectively doing what my last businesses had done, but I had dressed it up nicer with a slightly higher price. I was still trading my time for money, and that meant that my ultimate wealth and the scale of my company was massively held back. So after a lot of time reflecting on that, I knew I needed to create a business model that was far more scalable and meant that I escaped fundamentally trading my time for money. So I then found out about a formula that completely changed my thinking, and I'm going to share it here with you so you too can try and find these higher leverage business models. It's called the effort to equity formula. For low leverage businesses, the calculation is time in times output equals income. However, For high leverage businesses, it works completely differently. The formula becomes time in times systems times scale equals equity. So for example, let's say that you're a freelancer writing emails for clients. You work 40 hours per week, you have 4 to 5 clients, and you earn maybe $5,000 a month. This would be very simple: time in times output equals income. However, now let's look at someone with a very similar skill set who used the high leverage formula. So there's a guy called Sam Parr who started the Hustle newsletter, and instead of getting more clients, he focused on building a media machine with content and went on to sell the newsletter to HubSpot for $27 million. He used fundamentally a lot of the same skills of writing emails, but he cleverly figured out a way to scale it, and in return, he turned his time into equity. So now let me show you the 5 exact things that you need to think about when finding a high leverage business. The first here is asynchronous delivery. So this is something that does not rely on you showing up for a particular time to make money. So the best examples here have always been SaaS tools, AI tools, platform revenue, marketplaces. Once the business is built, it delivers the service without you having to be present. These are things that usually require you to put a lot of time up front, but once they're built, they can make money while you sleep. The second is recurring revenue, which means that you're not starting from zero every single month. So there is a reason that almost every business under the sun is trying to switch to recurring revenue. And that might be recurring revenue as a service business or subscription revenue as a B2C like Netflix or Amazon. It allows you to scale much more confidently as you're not chasing new revenue every single month. So a good personal example of this is when I was 21 through 26, my company effectively sold websites to businesses. And it was a great business, but the challenge was that a website is a fixed fee product. And so we might be paid $10,000 or $20,000 to build a website. However, there was no recurring revenue. And so at around the age of 25, 26, I changed the business model to provide digital marketing services as well. And so we then got a base of SEO, PPC, paid social media, and that allowed us to be confident enough to make hires and to scale and grow the business. And then the website project ended up being a positive on top. They were additional revenue to our baseline. And that allowed us to then go on and scale from a team of 5 to 10 through to, over the next 5 years, effectively get to 100 people. The third point is high margins. If it costs you $800 to deliver a $1,000 product, you're stuck, and it's going to take a huge amount of customers to make this viable. So instead, try and aim to find models that have naturally very high margins. So digital products and SaaS are the obvious winners here. A lot of people would say AI is an obvious winner here. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight in that a lot of AI companies are effectively selling compute power, which they're licensing from the major LLMs, which would be, OpenAI and Grok and DeepSeek, etc. They're effectively selling that compute power onto the consumer at a markup. And so while you might think that these AI companies are super fast growth and all the rest of it, and they're very rarely super fast growth and highly profitable. And so again, it's really, really worth thinking about the margin of the business before you go into it. And while you're growing the business, try and make decisions that affect the long-term margin of the business more than anything else. The fourth point is the ease of distribution. And as goes the famous quote, first-time founders think about the product, and second-time founders think about the distribution. Distribution is everything within the business. If the product or service is easy to market to a larger audience, it becomes far easier to sell. Let's think about a few examples of naturally viral products. Zoom. When someone sends you an invite to a Zoom call, you see the new product Zoom. Let's think about Calendly. Similarly, if someone invites you to pick a slot in their diary through Calendly, you've suddenly seen this new product. And think about Loom. When someone sends you a fancy recording of their screen, you suddenly see this new product Loom. And so by the very nature of the product's existing, distribution is built in. Another play these days for products that are less able to naturally market themselves is personal brand and social media. So build your personal brand and find a product that aligns well with you. So if you can build a large audience personally yourself and have a product that aligns to your audience and what your audience are looking for, it will compound the more you grow your channels. This is why so many huge creators and celebrities are now starting multiple businesses, because their distribution is already huge. So think about The Rock and his tequila brand, or Ryan Reynolds and Mint Mobile, or even smaller creators who have big audiences who sell them some form of high margin product that aligns with what they're looking for. I think in this example, a lot of people can make a really good amount of money in a business that doesn't scale hugely, but provides them high margin and cash flow if they have a good audience. And finally, number 5 is scaling with technology and AI. So many founders get their hiring wrong, and it's often why the businesses will fail early. So you need to scale through tech and through AI rather than just people. If growing requires you to hire a huge swathe more of people, you aren't in a naturally very scalable business. But we are now in a time where if you learn how to use technology and AI properly, you simply don't have to hire for a lot of the positions that traditionally you had to, meaning you can keep the team incredibly lean and keep your margins even higher. So this is why at the moment I would avoid physical products or events-based businesses personally. And to give a personal example here, in my 20s, I had 100 staff at my company. I would say dozens of those positions no longer exist in the same way. A good example is I used to have a sales assistant who used to analyze incoming inquiries to the business, prepare a report based on the person inquiring and what we would say back to them, and write me a draft to send back to that person. The other day, I built an agent that does exactly that. And so I no longer pay that person a salary, I now just have an agent that's part of my monthly subscription. So if you do find a rising tide market and you find a business model that you believe has high margin, high leverage, you're pretty much 95% ahead of all entrepreneurs already. However, you have to first test the demand, which is why step 3 is selling first and then building with clarity. So if you're like most people starting a business, you may think that building a product first is the best approach to take. Well, in my opinion, this is very wrong. And about 80% of people waste months building something that none of the customers actually want. So the most important thing that you can get before creating your product is validation from the audience. So this was actually my main strategy before building out my present education business. I created a landing page which showed exactly what I was willing to offer with the exact price to pay. I created a waiting list which involved putting down a deposit which would show your interest in participating with the product. If the demand wasn't there, all I would have done is just refunded people who put the deposit in. But fortunately, we were able to get enough people to start the business, and our first cohort program made $300,000 with just myself and one team member. So let me show you the exact way to do this with 3 core steps using the NLM model, which is newsletter, landing page, minimal viable product, or MVP for short. So the first thing that I would do is try and create a newsletter around the problem that you are trying to solve. So in this stage, you're not selling anything, but instead you're sharing useful ideas, content, and insights around your niche. If you're looking to build a newsletter fast, I would simply go into the areas where people are sharing these problems. For example, Reddit forums, Facebook groups, and talk about the problem and the solutions and talk about your newsletter there. As well as this, I would start creating content on social media platforms that are doing well. So right now that might be LinkedIn or X, and try and grow that list at a faster speed by creating high quality lead magnets. The aim here is to build trust and to collect feedback from people. So make sure that on your newsletter there is a clear section where people can discuss their thoughts and provide feedback on the information that you're sending out on the newsletter. So if you've got your positioning right here, this should give you a few hundred people who are heavily bought into the problem that you are solving and will likely invest in you first and use your product first. So once you have clearly built this trust with people, you can then move into stage 2, which is creating a test landing page. This landing page will be based upon the research that you've completed with your current audience and should aim to clearly solve one micro problem. You can then build a 1-page offer that pitches the result that your product delivers, and again, focus on keeping it simple and easy to buy. This isn't a full site. It's just a landing page to simply gauge interest in your product. So I wouldn't invest thousands into creating a website. And instead, I might just use tools like Lovable to build something super fast with AI. You can then separate those who are slightly interested with those who are willing to purchase something by either putting them on a wait list or an early access space. And once you have a small amount of people here, you can then move them into stage 3, which is effectively creating your MVP, your minimal viable product. So 90% of businesses will get this stage wrong and fail. And so it's really important that you listen closely here. The goal with an MVP is to strip your product down to one key feature, solving one main problem and collect as much information as possible. An example here would be how Jeff Bezos knew internet adoption was 2,300% a year, and instead of building lots of products, they started simply by selling books. They then collected as much feedback as possible and started expanding out their product range. If you create too many features on day one, it's much harder to get feedback, and usually your customers will get overwhelmed fast and they won't want to use the website if it's complicated. So if you've executed exactly on what we have discussed so far, it's likely that you're sitting on an incredible opportunity. However, a lot of founders get themselves in this position and will often fail due to a few really common mistakes. I know these so well, as I've been through them, I've made them all, and I've come out the other end 15 years later after building businesses. Step 4 is the frameworks to avoid the common mistakes. So the common mistake that I see entrepreneurs make hundreds of times over and over again is focusing on features instead of outcomes. So it's really easy to become obsessed with what you're building and forget the reasons why people will actually be buying the product in the first place. I even saw this with a really experienced entrepreneur friend of mine recently who spent months building a SaaS tool which has, I think, 10 or 12 product features. He's invested $100,000 of his own money to get the product set up and live. But when he launched, he was so focused on getting customers to try and use all of these different features that he forgot that the whole reason people would use this tool in the first place was to get them a desired outcome. So this lack of clarity with the outcome meant that people were just confused and they were overwhelmed. And frankly, they didn't really have the buy-in to the product to explore multiple different features. 6 months later, he had to close the business down and it was too expensive to run as he just didn't get the sort of numbers that he needed. I honestly see this happening all the time with founders, which is why I created a model that is perfect for this exact problem. I will ensure that you build $1 million business, keeping outcomes for the consumer at the front of your mind. It's called the DMP model, which stands for desire, mechanism, and proof. Stage 1 is consolidating the desire. You should have a very good idea by now of the problem you are solving, but aim to get even clearer with yourself. Do the following task. Go back to 5 customers who are deeply engaged in what you're building and ask them to answer the following 2 questions. What is your biggest frustration right now? If I could solve one thing for you, what would that be? When they give you these responses, write them down and print them out. Put them in front of you wherever you work. I do this for every business I ever start. I find out the core customer problems within the segment and I pin them to my computer. So every single time we're creating new content, we're creating a new product, amending a new feature, I do it through the lens of the core customer problems. So everything you do from now on is based on these answers. Forget about adding more features because you think they're cool. Just keep it super simple and help the customer with their challenges. Stage 2 is mechanism. And this is effectively how for your promise that you built in stage 1. A quick exercise you can do here is break down your product into 3 clear steps. So for example, let's say you're building an automated time tracking tool for busy founders. The 3 stages could be: 1, connect your calendar and task manager. 2, the tool will automatically track how you spend your time across meetings and across tasks. And then 3, it will send you a daily report showing exactly where your time went. You then name this as a method. So for example, it could be the focus flow method, and use this after the promise in all of your pitches and sales pages. So a pitch for this sample could be: we help founders reclaim hours of lost time every week, all done through something we call the focus flow method, and then explain how the method works. The final stage of the model is proof. So now that you've identified what they want and how they will get it, you now need to get them to believe in you. This is where reviews, testimonials, and information about who you are and your values come into play enormously. People buy from people, but people also buy results and outcomes. So it's pretty simple, but most founders really forget this in the early stages. So whilst you're in the MVP stage, try and collect the best reviews and testimonials as possible. So for the first 100 customers of our care home marketplace, instead of just giving them a number they could call care homes, instead we gave them our number. They could call us and we would work with the different care homes to find them the best outcome, which sometimes meant booking cabs for them, booking visits for them, organizing bits and pieces of their life to make everything easier. But that did mean that our first 100 customers gave us, 5 out of 5, but also were willing to give written, detailed testimonials of how quality our service was. Because these results will always be your best marketing. So focus 1,000% of your energy on the first 100 customers. As Brian Chesky says, deliver them an 11-star service. The other question I like to ask myself here is, how do I get one customer to just tell one more prospective customer? Focus on that problem and you will get unbelievable value for your business. So once you master this stage, you should be able to get out an MVP and start building a highly successful business that has a lot of opportunity to scale. But with scale can often come problems, and common mistake number 2 for founders is the founder bottleneck problem. This is where the founder struggles to delegate or makes poor hiring decisions, which mean that they never escape the actual day-to-day work. This is really commonplace for first-time entrepreneurs who will find themselves often in trouble because of this. They've got the business off the ground, but they've become stuck because they can't seem to move on without being heavily involved in every single thing. So there are 2 main things I want to teach you here about how you can avoid this trap. So the first is, try and keep your business as lean as possible. You can use AI and really try and only focus on hiring phenomenal people and pay a little bit more. So many founders will think that the key to building their business is hiring people when it's actually about hiring smarter and building better systems. So a good rule of thumb that I like to refer to here is to keep your team under 8 people. And it's just a bit of an adaptation of Jeff Bezos' 2 pizza rule, which is no meeting at Amazon should have more than 2 pizzas could adequately feed. Do not rush hiring. Instead, I will show you the exact process I went through with my hiring process that meant we could build a 10 million turnover business with just 5 people. So first, 100% check that you need the role and it cannot be done by AI or automations. Then create a very detailed job ad and start looking for the right person. Typically, I've found that the best talent are usually within your own network. And if you're building a product that has a community attached to it, which might be early adopters of the product or users of the products, you will often find customers and advocates wanting to come and build with you. So when you're interviewing, the very first question you should ask is, why do you think that we need this position instead of using AI? If they can then provide you with a really good answer and fit the overall culture of your current team, take them to the next stage. The next stage should be completing a task. Now, this is a bit more controversial, but I found that those who are willing to put the work in on a task before the interview are naturally very hardworking and really want the role. And so this acts as a great qualifier for those who are willing to put in the work. And so whenever anyone says, oh, do I have to do a task? I say, no problem, and I won't take them through to the next stage. Remember, the first year of a startup is 5 to 10 people in a room. They're working very hard. They're building the culture of the business by working hard, and they're bought into the mission. And finally, I would involve parts of your team within the interview process to get their opinion. So a lot of founders go wrong by trusting their gut exclusively. So having someone else there can make a much more objective decision and make sure that the talent is actually very strong. Once you have a small team of 5 to 8 to 10 people, make sure they are consistently upskilling with AI. The goal here is to make them more efficient, and it will keep your business as lean as possible and upskill your whole team. So it's important to make your team feel excited by change and to create the right environment where they want to use more AI, be more creative and take more risks. I actually saw a really brilliant example of this the other day from a CEO who's incentivizing his team to build the best AI agent by rewarding them with $20,000. This might seem a bit excessive, but if their teams can get very strong at this skill, they will effectively be saving thousands on salaries and having far more automation and scale in their business. So once you have a phenomenal team around you and you're leveraging AI to help with scale without taking on more people, there is one more stage that you need to master to take the business to the next level. Step 5 is upgrading your own mindset to match your ambition. So now I'm going to share with you quite a shocking reality that most people are unaware of because very few people are actually talking about it. So when founders follow the very same steps that I've shared in this video, they will often find themselves in a position where their company is growing, but they burn out quite quickly because they simply don't have the experience to keep up with that growth. Because running a $100,000 per year business and running a $1 million per year business are two completely different things, and they require a completely different skill set. And for most founders I've seen and I've experienced myself, they simply can't keep up with the pace, especially if they have scaled within a very short period of time. This is where smart founders can either take two routes. Either hire a CEO to take over with the sort of heavy lifting, or find ways to improve their own skill set very intentionally. So a good example of the first one is when Ben Francis, who is the founder of Gymshark, realized early on they were scaling rapidly, and to take it to the next level, he needed someone with more experience and a better skill set, had been around longer, and he hired Steve Hewitt in 2017 to take over the role. Obviously, if you can't afford a CEO or you don't want to do it, there is a way to go down an alternative route, and this is something that I had to do when I was building my first company, Verb, when we went from effectively a 2 million turnover business to a 7 million turnover business in the space of about 2 years. I built what I now call an accountability and an acceleration matrix, which focuses on two very different types of people. So those who are at the same stage as you, who share the same goals as you and have the same ambition as you, they are the sort of people that will keep you accountable. You set a shared goal and you ensure that you keep to it. A good example of this is when I first decided to build my personal brand. I felt incredibly alone when I had started that process, and so I looked for other people who were also looking to grow their personal brand and formed a great group of 5 or 6 others. We formed a WhatsApp, we regularly talked, we talked about challenges, and by working together, we kept each other accountable to post every single day for that first year. This resulted in us becoming some of the fastest growing creators on the platform, and that year I went from 20,000 followers to 350,000 followers, and my friends also saw massive improvements. So I recommend that you have 3 to 5 people who will act as accountability peers. And so make a commitment to each other that you're there to help them improve. Create a group chat, and you can use it regularly, you can meet up, you can have calls, but try and focus on keeping them consistent and ask them to keep you consistent. So the second type of people that can really accelerate your thinking is to try and find people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. So don't focus on people who are 5 to 10 steps ahead of you. The reason being is that those who are 2 or 3 steps ahead have likely encountered the same problems that you're dealing with right now and have fixed them and solved them recently. They are far more reachable than trying to get hold of billionaires or 100 millionaires. So to get in touch with these people, I would take 3 main tips at this stage. The first is support them without asking for anything in return. So let's say that they are trying to build an audience on a new social media platform. You need to be the one supporting all their posts, as this will get you on their radar. And doing this for a few weeks, you then need to figure out how you can try and provide them some real value. Think about your core strengths and see if you can offer them something that will really benefit them immediately. It might be an introduction, it might be an article, whatever it is. Finally, look to see if you have any mutual connections for someone to introduce you. Almost half my network came through warm introductions, and it's often the easiest way to access people. So ladies and gentlemen, you now know the 5 steps I would use to build a $1 million business from scratch. But none of this matters if you don't act. I've mentored thousands of entrepreneurs now, and those who succeed are the ones who simply act on the advice. Anyone can apply these strategies, but the truth is, the high majority of people will not. So get started today. Like and subscribe to the channel. Share with me in the comments the one thing that you're getting started on. I want to give away as much free advice on practically how to build businesses and improve yourself. So let me know how I can help you. I appreciate you enormously, and I'll see you in the next video.